If you live in the southern United States, or even if you've just visited, there is a very high probability that you have walked past a source of caffeine that is, in many ways, superior to the coffee or tea you drink every morning. You have likely seen it in shopping mall parking lots, in the perfectly manicured hedges of suburban lawns, or growing wild in the understory of pine forests. It is an evergreen holly with small, serrated leaves and brilliant red berries. We treat it as decoration. We treat it as mulch. But for at least 8,000 years before the arrival of Europeans, this plant was the center of civilization in North America. It was the black drink, the sacred beverage of trade, purification, and diplomacy. It was so valuable that it was traded thousands of miles north to the great city of Cahokia, near modern-day St. Louis, where kings drank it from cups carved of lightning whelk shells. So why, in a nation obsessed with caffeine, a country that fought a revolution partly over a tax on tea, do we not drink the one caffeinated plant that actually belongs to us? Why do we import coffee from South America and tea from Asia while ignoring the sacred white path growing in our own backyard? The answer isn't just about taste. It is about a botanical assassination. It is the story of how a native superfood was systematically rebranded, smeared by a royal botanist, and given a Latin name so repulsive that it would terrify consumers for 300 years. Ilex vomitoria. This is the story of Yaupon Holly, the lost tea of America, and why it is finally time to drink it again.
Today, we are looking at Ilex vomitoria, commonly known as yaupon. To the uninitiated, it is a generic landscaping shrub. It is tough, drought-tolerant, and evergreen, which makes it perfect for the neglected corners of office parks. But biologically, it is a powerhouse. Yaupon is a close cousin of yerba mate, the South American tea that has become a global health phenomenon. Like mate, yaupon contains caffeine. In fact, it is the only plant native to North America that contains caffeine. But it doesn't just contain caffeine, it contains a unique cocktail of theobromine, the pleasure molecule found in dark chocolate, and a host of antioxidants that rival green tea. Yet, you cannot find it in most grocery stores. When early settlers arrived in the New World, they loved it. They called it cassina and even began exporting it to Europe. It was on the verge of becoming a global commodity, and then, quite suddenly, it vanished from the market. It was relegated to the status of a weed or a poor man's drink, and eventually it was forgotten entirely, existing only as a decorative hedge. In this dossier, we are going to uncover the truth about the black drink. We will examine the archaeological evidence that proves its role in the complex economies of pre-Columbian America. We will investigate the suspicious circumstances of its scientific naming in 1789, which many historians now believe was an intentional act of corporate sabotage by the British tea monopoly. And finally, we will look at the modern science that confirms yaupon is not only safe, but chemically superior to many of the caffeinated beverages we consume today. This is the rediscovery of North America's lost liquid gold.
To understand yaupon, we must look further back than the colonial era, deep into the prehistory of the American Southeast. Long before the Spanish or British arrived, the indigenous peoples of the region, including the ancestors of the Timucua, Creek, Muskogee, Cherokee, Choctaw, and others, had domesticated and venerated this plant. They called it asi, or the beloved drink. The preparation was not merely a morning habit, it was a ritual of immense spiritual weight. The leaves were harvested, parched over fire to roast them, much like modern coffee or yerba mate, and then boiled in large communal pots until the liquid was dark, rich, and frothy.
The Spanish explorer Cabeza de Vaca, wandering through Texas in the 1530s, wrote of tribes who celebrated festivals for days, drinking nothing but this tea. But the most striking evidence of its importance comes from the black drink ceremony. In these ceremonies, the tea was brewed very strong. It was consumed from cups made of lightning whelk shells, marine shells that had to be brought from the Gulf Coast. The black drink was associated with purity, with the white path of peace and clarity. It was drunk before council meetings to ensure that the mind was sharp and the spirit was clean. It was drunk before games of stickball, the violent ancestor of lacrosse, to give warriors stamina and focus. Crucially, in some specific purification rituals, the drink was consumed in massive quantities, gallons at a time, often after days of fasting. The result, intended by the participants, was regurgitation. They would purge the drink to cleanse themselves of impurities, both physical and spiritual. This is a critical distinction. The vomiting was not caused by a toxin in the leaves. It was caused by the sheer volume of hot liquid, often mixed with other emetic herbs like button snake root, and the physiological engagement of the stomach muscles. It was a choice, not a side effect. The value of Yaupon was so high that it drove a continental trade network. Archaeologists analyzing pottery shards from Cahokia, the massive Mississippian city near modern St. Louis that flourished around 1050 AD, made a shocking discovery in 2012. They found chemical residues of caffeine, theobromine, and ursolic acid inside beaker-shaped vessels. Cahokia is hundreds of miles north of the natural range of Yaupon Holly. The plant cannot survive the hard winters of Illinois. This means that 1,000 years ago, traders were carrying bags of roasted Yaupon leaves up the Mississippi River, trading them for copper, mica, and shells. The black drink was the coffee of the ancient Mississippian world, a luxury good that connected kings and commoners across a continent.
If Yaupon was the continent's preferred stimulant for millennia, how did it disappear? When the Spanish established St. Augustine in Florida in 1565, they quickly adopted the drink. They called it té del indio. Later, English settlers in the Carolinas took to it as well. They called it cassina, or Carolina tea. In the early 1700s, it was a common sight in colonial pantries. It was free, it grew everywhere, and it provided a buzz similar to the expensive tea being imported by the British East India Company. By the mid-18th century, cassina was being exported to France and England. It was gaining a foothold in the fashionable salons of Europe, and this, historians suspect, was its fatal error. It became a threat. The British East India Company was, at the time, the most powerful corporation on earth. They had a state-sanctioned monopoly on the tea trade with China and India. Their entire business model relied on the British and their colonies remaining addicted to Camellia sinensis, Asian tea. A free, wild-growing alternative from America that required no shipping from China was a direct danger to their profits. Enter William Attin. Attin was a Scottish botanist and the director of the Royal Botanic Gardens at Kew. He was the man responsible for the official scientific classification of plants in the British Empire. In 1789, he officially named the Yaupon Holly. He knew the history. He knew the indigenous tribes used it for purification. But he also knew the tea trade. He gave Yaupon the permanent scientific name Ilex vomitoria, holly that causes vomiting. It was a branding death sentence. Imagine trying to sell a new beverage today called nausea berry or puke weed.
No matter how good it tasted, the name alone would kill it. Whether Aten acted with malicious intent to protect the East India Company or simply out of a misunderstanding of the indigenous purging ritual is still debated, but the effect was undeniable. Who would buy vomit tea? Simultaneously, the cultural landscape of America was shifting. The black drink was associated with Native Americans, and as relations between the expanding United States and indigenous tribes deteriorated into war and removal, the adoption of native customs became taboo. The final nail in the coffin was the rise of the coffee sugar plantation economy and the cheap availability of Indian tea. By the 19th century, Yaupon was relegated to the rural poor. Drinking it became a sign of poverty. If you could afford real store-bought tea or coffee, you drank that. If you were destitute, you went into the woods and picked Yaupon. Eventually, the knowledge of how to roast and brew it died out almost entirely. The fields were plowed over, or, worse, the plants were dug up and moved to the suburbs to become ornamental hedges, their history erased, trimmed into balls and squares, completely silent.
Today, the vomitoria myth has been debunked by science. We now know exactly what is inside the leaves of Ilex vomitoria, and the profile is nothing short of remarkable. First, let's address the toxin question. Does it make you vomit? Absolutely not. Modern chemical analysis shows that Yaupon leaves contain no emetic compounds. They are perfectly safe. The historic vomiting was, as suspected, purely ritualistic and mechanical. You can drink Yaupon all day long without any gastric distress. In fact, it is often gentler on the stomach than coffee. The primary active compound is caffeine, present in concentrations ranging from 0.65% to 0.85% by weight, roughly comparable to green tea or yerba mate, though less than coffee. But the caffeine in Yaupon behaves differently in the body because of its partner compounds. Yaupon is rich in theobromine. This is the alkaloid found in cocoa beans that gives dark chocolate its mood-lifting properties. Theobromine is a vasodilator. It widens blood vessels and lowers blood pressure, which counteracts the jittery, vasoconstricting effects of pure caffeine. This creates a sensation of clean energy. It provides focus and alertness without the crash or the wired feeling associated with espresso. Furthermore, Yaupon contains theophylline, a compound often used in asthma medication because it relaxes the smooth muscles of the airway and improves breathing. But the most distinct advantage of Yaupon over traditional tea, Camellia sinensis, is the lack of tannins. If you leave a green or black tea bag in your cup for too long, the tea becomes astringent, bitter, and dry. This is due to tannins. Yaupon is naturally low in tannins. You can boil it for 20 minutes or leave the leaves steeping in your mug for an hour, and it will never turn bitter. It remains naturally sweet, with notes of caramel, grass, and earth. From a nutritional perspective, it is an antioxidant powerhouse. A 2009 study from the University of Florida found that Yaupon leaves are packed with polyphenols, specifically chlorogenic acid, also found in green coffee beans and linked to slow glucose release, and rutin, a bioflavonoid known for strengthening blood vessels and reducing inflammation. From an agricultural perspective, Yaupon is a miracle crop. Because it is native to the American Southeast, it has evolved to survive the region's sandy soils, intense heat, and salt spray. It requires zero pesticides, it has natural defenses against most insects, zero fertilizer, and zero irrigation once established. Compare this to the carbon footprint of coffee or tea. Coffee is a sensitive tropical crop that is increasingly threatened by climate change and rust diseases. It must be shipped thousands of miles to reach North American consumers. Tea often comes from monocultures in Asia, heavily treated with agrochemicals. Yaupon grows wild, sequestering carbon in our own soils, requiring no inputs. It is the definition of a sustainable, perennial, climate-resilient crop.
We are living in an era of precarious food systems. We rely on supply chains that stretch across oceans, dependent on stable climates and stable geopolitics. We have become disconnected from the land beneath our feet, to the point where we spray poison on the weeds in our yard, unaware that those weeds are ancient superfoods. The revival of Yaupon is about more than just a new caffeine trend. It is an act of ecological and historical restorative justice. By drinking Yaupon, we are participating in a 10,000-year-old tradition. We are validating the indigenous knowledge that was silenced by colonial arrogance. We are choosing a crop that heals the local ecosystem rather than degrading it. There is a profound irony in the American morning routine. We wake up, drive to a coffee shop, and pay $5 for a stimulant grown in clear-cut rainforests in Brazil or Vietnam. All the while, we drive past hedges of Ilex vomitoria, the sacred antioxidant-rich native tea that sustained empires like Cahokia. It has been hiding in plain sight for 3 centuries, disguised by a lie about vomiting. But the disguise is slipping. The black drink is rising again, and this time, we know what it's worth.